Good evening. Today is October 2nd, 2021. I'm Robert Cressionnie.
I'm John Gatsis.
Welcome to America in Danger. You know, I'm just going to go ahead and say it because I know there are a lot of highly educated individuals out there who will dismiss this as just, I don't know what they'll dismiss it as, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Okay.
What we have going on in this country right now is a communist insurrection.
Yeah.
We have a communist conspiratorial insurrection going on in this country right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
And you know, this isn't something that just happened overnight. This isn't something that just developed since Trump was in office.
Right. It's not some kind of trendy thing that that a bunch of ignorant college students and young people have picked up on. This is something for which the seeds have been laid. Many
centuries ago.
Years. Yeah,
centuries ago. And you know, I want to go back to the French Revolution because many of the tactics we're seeing today are straight out of the French Revolution.
It was really the prototype for the Bolsheviks, and
it was the prototype. It absolutely was. And in fact, one of the individuals that participated in that was known as the first revolutionary communist. But I want to give you a little history because it's so important that we understand history. Because if you don't, you tend to repeat it.
And before you do that, it's important to note that many of us have grown up in this country, often when discussing American history, hearing about the French Revolution, and they treat it as if it was some kind of a parallel to the American War for Independence. Right. It's often characterized because it was fundamentally, the French Revolution really was democratic in the worst sense of that word, and the sense of the word that the founders did not endorse. Because the U.S. is predicated on a constitutional republic and was specifically not a democracy. And the French Revolution very much incorporated those elements. Hideous outcomes.
Ooh, yes.
But we're always told somehow that the French Revolution was sort of like their American War for Independence, and nothing could be further from the truth. And I think the things you're about to read will absolutely elucidate that point.
I agree, and that's an excellent point because so many people do correlate it to the American War for Independence.
Yeah.
And it's no similarity
whatsoever.
Polar
opposites. Exactly polar opposites.
Polar opposites, absolutely. Yeah. While they use some of the terminology.
Well, they always do.
They always do. Even the communists do.
Well, isn't North Korea the Democratic Republic of Korea?
Yes.
I mean,
and the USSR was
correct. Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.
Republics, yeah. All right, so let's look at this because it's very important to understand these things and to know what's going on and being done. The French Revolution started in 1789 with the storming of the Bastille. Now, the Bastille was a military base, and many times in grade school and middle school we're taught that they were releasing political prisoners and that it was a just thing to do and this, that, and the other.
Right.
Well, it was revolutionaries seeking to gain armament and gunpowder in order to overthrow the monarchy.
And when you're trying to blow up the society, you might turn criminals loose on it. Kind of like it's happening across the nation right now. But,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Jumping ahead.
Now, the French Revolution essentially ended in 1799 with the ascendancy of Napoleon Bonaparte.
Right.
Everyone realizes who Napoleon is. He basically killed the revolution and set himself up as emperor for life.
That's right.
Now, the French Revolution actually spawned what we know as communism. Mm-hmm. Now, it's been many names throughout history. In the 1790s, the Jacobins, which many people have heard of, probably really don't understand what it was, but it was similar to a political party, which is what it was.
Sure.
They operated in what was called the National Convention, which was the French legislature at the time. That's what it was called. They were made up of two divisions, the Girondins and the more radical Montagnards.
Yeah.
And they got that name because they sat high in the seating.
Right.
That's how they got that. Now, Maximilien Robespierre was a member of the more radical Montagnards.
Right.
Now, the Jacobins seized control of the National Convention. They seized control of the legislature, much like the Democrats are trying to do today.
Yes.
And they did it underhandedly, just like the Democrats are doing today. And they established what they called the Committee of Public Safety. Oh, very catchy. Oh, public safety. Yes, we really need a committee of public safety.
Kind of sounds like, when we hear calls for gun control, common sense gun safety laws.
Exactly. Well, they promptly abolished the monarchy and set themselves up as rulers with Robespierre, the chief in charge.
Right, which made the monarchy, the prior monarchy, seem benevolent when viewed in light of things to come.
Now, they promised everyone everything. Because, France was in turmoil. It was the monarchy had made bad decisions. They had wasted the money, just like governments do now.
And the monarchy was a form of total government that is also subject or ultimately destined to create problems and fail.
Exactly. Which is no great shakes.
No great shakes.
Now, the Committee of Public Safety promised that they would build a natural paradise. All things would be provided: food, shelter, employment, everything would be provided, except now there was a big exception. If you were wealthy, oh no.
Right.
If you disagreed with anything they said or did, oh no, not you.
Right.
If you spoke out in any way, oh no, not you.
Well, it was an arbitrary and capricious state.
It's similar to what's going on today.
To what we're
if you speak out against anything, you're ostracized.
That's right.
You're fired. You're terminated from your job.
That's right.
Now, Robespierre promptly dictated that anyone not obeying the rules of the revolution was an enemy and must be punished. Now, where have we heard that?
Well, right in the halls of Congress with the so-called progressives. I wish the people on our side would quit acceding to the terminology of the left.
Absolutely.
They're not progressive, they're communists, and let's just start calling them communists.
Exactly right.
They're communist revolutionaries. They hate America and its Constitution, and their express objective is to destroy it.
Absolutely. Now, as I said earlier, the Committee of Public Safety was basically made up of Jacobins, and the Jacobins were made up of the Girondins and the Montagnards.
Right.
Now, who do you think was rounded up first?
Well,
and headed to the guillotine.
Well, there's an old phrase, old saying about, the Montagnards always consume the Girondins or the Girondards, and Robespierre.
Yeah.
He ended up getting put to the guillotine.
He ultimately did, but the Girondins, they carted them off first. They got rid of them, and Robespierre, went on for another year or two. So by '93, the Girondins, they wiped them out.
Right.
There were a few that kind of went undercover and hung around, but they largely wiped them out. Now, they were part of the same club.
Absolutely.
Part of the same club. It's kind of like the Democrats are doing with the moderates and the progressives.
Well, and an intermediate point in history was the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks and the Russian Revolution. Same thing. I mean, they were all part of that communist revolution, almost wholly modeled on the French Revolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, in all, around 40,000 people were killed during this reign of terror, as it came to be known as.
Right.
I guess a large portion, 85%, were the very people that they promised utopia to.
Correct.
They were the poor, the middle class, the working class.
Well, and for offenses like not offering everything that they own, if they had excess quantities of soap or food, and they didn't put them out and make them available, they were hanged. I mean, they were guillotined.
They were. In fact, that was called the Decree Against Profiteers.
Right.
Now, what the Decree Against Profiteers did, it made it illegal to hold anything more than you were going to use for personal use in a day's time.
Right.
You had to put it out there for sale. It made monopoly a capital crime.
Right. And they're with their definition of monopoly being extremely severe and unreasonable.
Exactly. So if you brought in a wagon load of goods, say you traveled a couple hundred miles, picked up a wagon load of goods and brought it in to sell it, oh no, that was a monopoly.
Right.
So your goods were seized, and you were carried off to the guillotine. Now, essential commodities and merchandise were bread, meat, wine, grain, flour, fruit, butter, vinegar, cider, brandy, charcoal, tallow, wood, oil, soap, soda, salt. And these things, if you had more than a salt shaker full of salt, you were hoarding.
Tantamount to a hoarder committing some kind of economic crime in their view.
And you had 1 week to cough up the goods. And if you didn't, you were carted off to the guillotine.
Yeah.
Now, that was just the first decree. There was another decree that was put out, and it was called the Law of Suspects.
Right.
The Law of Suspects.
Right.
And this was an interesting law because what it did, it said all persons are deemed suspects if by their conduct, association, talk, writings, have shown themselves to be enemies of liberty. So in other words, if you spoke out against the Committee of Public Safety, you were committing a capital crime.
Right. And note the Orwellian use of language there.
Yeah.
Enemies of liberty.
Enemies of liberty, yes. Yes. If you were unable to justify the means of your existence, or you were unable to perform your civic duties, was off to the guillotine.
Right.
Those whose certificates of patriotism, kind of like maybe a vaccine passport,
Or any other formal endorsement these people want to put forward.
exactly.
Yeah.
So they were giving out certificates of patriotism, and if you didn't meet up, or they didn't like you, or they just didn't want to give you one, some little bureaucrat who was appointed to that position wouldn't give you one. Well, when they came around to round people up, if you couldn't produce one, was off to the guillotine.
Well, the circumstances certainly didn't represent government by laws rather than men.
Exactly.
I mean, it was a classic case of
democracy.
Yeah, democracy.
Pure
Exactly.
democracy.
Pure democracy.
Exactly. If you were a public official and you were fired from your job, off to the guillotine. Former nobles, husbands, wives, fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, brothers, and sisters of immigrants who had not steadily demonstrated a devotion to the revolution.
Yeah, that talk right there sounds. I mean, that could be a snippet for one of Fidel Castro's speeches.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, and we're hearing this from our congressmen and senators.
Right.
AOC said that Trump supporters needed to be rounded up and punished.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Isn't that what I just read in here?
Absolutely.
In the 1700s?
Well, that's who these people are.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
increasingly, they're not even that furtive about it. I mean, they're
Absolutely.
pretty out in the open with their positions on things.
They are. They absolutely are. They're communists.
They're communists.
Now, one would think that when Napoleon took power and put an end to the revolution, one would think that that would have been the end of the communists, known as the Jacobins.
Yeah.
Well, no, it wasn't. One of the disciples, Francois Noel Babeuf, known as the first revolutionary communist, founded what was called the Conspiracy of Equals. So he went around to people and said, you know what, we're just not equal under Napoleon. We need to be equal. Everyone needs to be equal. We need this equality. We need equity.
Right. That's
Equity.
really right. They really weren't calling for equality under the law in the courts. They were
Right.
calling for equity. They were calling for redistribution.
Exactly. Well, his conspiracy of equals failed and he was executed. Now, interesting point, Babeuf was a journalist.
Right.
Fathom that.
Yeah, imagine.
He was a journalist.
Well, journalists are often, the dumbest of the educated classes.
Absolutely. Now, in 1834, Philip Buonarroti, a cohort of Babeuf's, and he happened to survive the failed Conspiracy of Equals, he founded the League of Outlaws.
Yeah.
At least he chose an appropriate name.
Right.
The League of Outlaws.
Right.
Now, Wilhelm Welting renamed the League of Outlaws to the League of the Just because he realized the League of Outlaws didn't sound too good, but the League of the Just sounds really
right.
good.
That wasn't good PR.
Yeah, the League of the Just, that sounds really good, really good. So what we're looking at here is just the group evolving.
Right.
Renaming, reforming,
Rebranding themselves.
Rebranding.
Yeah.
Exactly, because after the League of Outlaws turned to the League of the Just, the League of the Just was reconstituted as the Blanquist Rebellion. All right, well, here again, we're getting back on that negative side of terminology, rebellion.
Yeah.
Well, the Blanquist Rebellion failed, of course, and it was renamed, those people that survived it and got out of it, and the communists there simply rebranded themselves as the Educational Society for German Working Men. All right, now how could that be harmful?
Well,
Educational Society for German Working Men?
Right,
What?
right.
That's That can't be harmful,
Right.
can it?
They were developing their ability at creating very benign and even benevolent sounding names for their organization.
Exactly.
Like the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Exactly. Well, the Educational Society for German Working Men, this was in 1847, joined the Communist Correspondence Committee.
Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
Here we go with old Karl Marx and Frederick Engels.
Right.
Now, most of the time when you mention communist, people,
They go to that as a starting point.
that
They-
exactly.
as the point of origin.
Exactly.
For that philosophy and that thinking.
Exactly. Really, it happened many years before.
And frankly, all throughout human history.
All throughout human history,
Right,
exactly.
Right. Essentially, a form of, authoritarian control.
Yep.
Uses terror, and it seeks to impose a monopoly of firepower and economic power over the rest of the population in the name of equity and equality.
Exactly.
And it uses grievance of one group against another
Yep.
to foment division in often a normally functioning state. Okay.
All while promising utopia.
That's right. Promising
And
utopia.
all things needed.
Right.
All things provided.
With an overarching philosophy of the end justifies the means. So what do we have to do to get this utopian point? Millions of people in camps, depopulation,
Yep.
murder, theft,
Green New Deal.
Green New Deal. All of these things are okay. Gotta break some
Yep.
omelets.
Yep.
Gotta to make an omelet, gotta break some eggs.
Gotta break
rather.
some eggs,
And
exactly.
that's their overarching philosophy. Problem is, it never ends, and it's never
Right.
successful.
That's exactly right, because the Communist Correspondence Committee ultimately installed the first communist government in Paris, known as the Paris Commune, which ultimately failed horribly. It destroyed half of Paris, destroyed many of the artifacts in Paris, and failed miserably.
And it's important to interject too, in case it's an obvious assumption, but probably bears explicit mentioning. Robespierre was an atheist. These people are all
yes.
these people hated.
Exactly.
And there's a reason for that. It's not so much that even those of us on the right, we all have varying levels of belief, but the problem the left has is that they don't want anybody to believe that there might be a higher power than than their own secular, authoritarian judgment on how the world should be.
That's absolutely right.
And once you convince people that there is no higher power, then there really is no morality other than the one that you define.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right.
I love having conversations with people who are atheists because they can't really justify a moral code that really fundamentally is Judeo-Christian in its origin, because they don't believe. But you cannot make a case for an absolute moral code without a higher authority.
Absolutely.
And so these communist revolutions and the French Revolution, they justify their genocide and their murder because they're the arbiters of the morality at that time. There is no higher power. And the French Revolution was also a prototype for that kind of thinking.
Exactly. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I did leave that out of the summation. But that was one of the things during the French Revolution. They abolished the churches. They persecuted Christians.
Right.
They based everything on nature.
Right.
Everything
And
was based on
reason,
nature.
what they called
And
reason.
reason, exactly. And the reasoning in this
Right.
was that anything that comes out of nature can't be wrong. So if a man becomes violent and kills people, well, that's just his nature. So that can't be considered wrong. That can't be considered immoral, because that was one of the dialectics that they used
To justify their murderous behavior.
the 40,000 people that they basically chopped their heads off.
Right.
Absolutely, and we see that going on today.
Right.
And and I have to say that some of the churches are doing a pretty good job of assisting in that.
Well, they're hoping they're eating last.
Hey, that's what it comes down to.
They're swimming around in the moat, and they're hoping that the alligators get to them last.
Get to them last. That's exactly right, and that's why we have a lot in politics these days.
Oh, definitely.
Politics, corporate America, all of these entities think that, well, if we just comply and we get on the bandwagon and we go for this
maybe
green
they'll
deal
let
and
us
this healthy
function.
new
Maybe
stuff.
they'll let us function for a little while longer.
Exactly.
Well, I say it a lot, but to me, currently government is a coalition of communists and grifters.
Absolutely.
And you can decide which ones are which, but to me, it's pretty obvious when you listen to them talk.
Well, that's as it always has been.
Right.
You know, the French Revolution, if you haven't studied up on it, I highly suggest you do. There are some great little short films from Epic TV.
There's some movies.
Go to epictv.com and look at that. It's all summed up and it's very clear, very easy to understand. 10 minutes. I mean, if you can't handle 10 minutes to educate yourself, then
go back to your fantasy football league.
Exactly.
And you know, concentrate on that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you know, it's communism, and as I opened up with, there are a lot of highly educated people who will dismiss that.
Highly credentialed.
Highly credentialed. Right. Education is a subjective measure.
Yeah.
And they've been to Ivy League schools and big name universities and what have you. And their perception of these things is so conditioned on what they were indoctrinated
it's predicated on some very, very distorted reviews of history.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And with that, we got to take a little break. When we come back, we are going to talk about a little illegal immigration and maybe a little COVID cult religion.
Okay.
All right. So stay tuned for more America in Danger. We'll be back in just a minute.
Hey, this is John Woodruff of Premier Equipment Company of Rocky Mountain Infield. Been shopping for a zero-turn mower lately. You've probably noticed that inventory is getting hard to come by. So come on down and see what we've got. We've got a showroom full. We have a showroom full of Exmark and Grasshopper zero-turn mowers. Everything from commercial to residential, everything in between. We've got a good relationship with our distributors. They tell us when we sell these, they've got more on the way. If you've been in the market for a zero-turn mower, come see me, John Woodruff, Premier Equipment.
Premier Equipment is open during the week from 8 to 5:30 and on the weekends from 8 to 12.
Are you afraid to answer the phone because of bill collectors? A Chapter 13 plan can help. Chapter 13 allows people with too many bills to work out a debt repayment plan under federal law. It helps you control your debts instead of your debts controlling you. Chapter 13 stops creditors from harassing you and stops repossessions and foreclosures. It allows you to answer the phone again without fear or worry. Call H. Frank Allen, Attorney at Law, a debt relief agency providing bankruptcy relief under the Bankruptcy Code.
All right, we are back. Today is October 2nd, 2021. The year is going fast. Really fast.
It really is.
Well, you know,
it's demoralizing.
It is. There seems to be a time warp here lately. Well, you know, we see illegal immigration, and here again we have people in Washington, D.C., Department of Homeland Security. Now, to me, I'm going to equate that with the Committee for Public Safety because they're not about security. They're not about securing the United States because you know, we're on tap for 2.4 million illegals coming into this country this year.
The latest number I'm hearing is 400,000 just in October.
Yeah. Heaviest month of the year, which previously were averaging in excess of 200,000 per month, and that's only the ones they know about. You know, Mayorkas, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, really issued an idiotic statement the other day.
So he talked.
He talked, yeah. Let me rephrase that. He issued another idiotic statement the other day. On top of his numerous idiotic statements. All right, he says he didn't expect the Delta surge at the border and can't believe that 1 in 5 migrants have an illness. Now, we know that the media went apoplectic when Trump said these illegals are bringing in diseases. The media went absolutely ballistic.
Correct.
called him a racist,
Sure.
called him a xenophobe, called him
Right.
everything under the sun. Tried to ran that 24/7.
That's right.
But here Mayorkas admits 1 in 5. That's 20%.
Correct.
That's 20%. That's 20 out of every 100 are bringing in a disease. Now, we're not talking about the sniffles.
Right. Well, we're
not talking about a cold.
I mean,
here.
we might be, but they're not letting us treat it that way, and they're certainly willing to use these people, and that's what I think, because I don't think he believes what he just said. I think he perfectly well knew.
He absolutely
right,
knew.
and they want to keep these positive, these COVID
Especially
positive
the
tests.
COVID. Yeah.
Correct. They want to keep the COVID thing going, and they're using illegal migrants to do a number of things. One of the things they're using them for is vectors for disease distribution,
Absolutely.
for COVID distribution around the country.
Yep.
Okay, to keep it going, to try
Yep.
and continue having surges and spikes, because they want to keep the phony election rules in place through the 22 midterm.
Yes, they do.
2022 midterm.
They want to have another shutdown, another lockdown to try and get mail-in balloting put
That's
into
right.
place, cemented in all the states.
I think, and of course, we're fond of pointing out the stupidity of so many of these statements, but I think maybe it's a subtle distinction here, but the statements may be stupid, but I think the people making them are not. They're counting on the
Right.
fact that large swaths of the American public are stupid and not paying
Exactly.
attention.
Not
and
paying
or we'll
attention.
just soak that up or dismiss it or not pay attention. There's no way that Mayorkas doesn't recognize or understand the pathogenic nature
absolutely.
of these migrants,
Absolutely.
you know, and what they're carrying, and they're coming across the border carrying this COVID. I mean, he knows that.
Absolutely. He knows
It's
it.
part of the plan.
Part of the
Part
plan.
of the
He-
program.
He knows that they're bringing in tuberculosis
That's right.
and other bloodborne diseases,
That's right.
and
This is all part of a design to overload the system.
It is. It absolutely is.
To make it so that it is not able to function and support
Absolutely.
support itself under the weight. So it's the Cloward and Piven thing,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
people need to look that up. It's a couple of professors, I think, out of Princeton.
Mm-hmm.
They were Marxist professors, which is kind of redundant these days,
Well,
folks.
that is.
They were Marxist professors who essentially advocated for the dissolution or the destruction of the United States by overloading its social services and overloading its fundamental infrastructure through illegal immigration and domestic welfare,
Yep.
and turning it into an entitlement economy. So this is part of that effort, and I think they've just decided we're going to go full in on this. You know, apparently nobody's really going to do much about it. Certainly none of the people that purport to represent our side of things, or our, the American people, the people who actually pay for all this stuff, through taxes. So I think they're just going for broke, and so that's why they appear to utter these non sequitur, ridiculous utterances that make no sense when scrutinized at all. They make no sense whatsoever. They're dumb statements. Jen Psaki says lots of dumb things.
geez, yes.
I have a hard time believing she's as dumb as she appears, although she appears pretty dumb even on the surface. So she may just be that dumb.
It's quite possible.
Hard to tell.
It's quite possible. And
Yeah.
the interesting thing about her is she is very articulate, significantly enough to appear to the left, to those who believe everything coming out of the White House and all, oh, yes, that woman is so smart.
Well, it's easy
So
to be
smart.
articulate when you already know in advance what kind of
What
questions,
kind of
what the
questions
questions
you're
are going to
gonna
be.
get. Exactly.
The only one that asks her anything that catches her off guard is Peter Doocy at Fox
Exactly.
News, and he's tepid and
Yeah.
pulls his punches.
Absolutely.
And she still gets flummoxed, and
Yeah.
that's when you hear the stupidity issue for it.
Absolutely.
Her extemporaneous remarks to his questions are dumb.
They are.
I think we have an example of
In fact,
one
we
such
do.
dumb
In
remark.
fact, we have one of the Jen Psaki absurdities.
Right.
This is absurdity. I've lost count. I don't even know what the
right.
number is on this. There are so many. Brittany, if you'll run that Jen Psaki absurdity.
Obviously, the president's commitment remains not raising taxes for anyone making less than $400,000 a year. There are some, and I'm not sure if this is the case in this report, who argue that in the past, companies have passed on these costs to consumers. I'm not sure if that's the argument being made in this report. We feel that that's unfair and absurd, and the American people would not stand for that. But I will take a closer look at this report and get you a more substantive response. Go ahead, Jackie.
Now,
Absurd and unfair is what she said
Yeah.
about businesses passing along increased costs to consumers. These increased costs in this particular case being taxes.
exactly.
Okay. And somehow, I don't know, I don't even know how to respond to this. I mean,
Well, I don't either, because any businessman out there understands that if your material prices go up, you charge more.
your labor costs go
If your
up.
labor prices go up, you charge more.
Right. If inflation is eating away the purchasing power of your money, and
Yeah.
you have to raise your prices because of that, because things appear to be going up,
you
you
charge more. Exactly.
And if Marxist-dominated government-imposed taxes go up, you might have to pass those costs along too.
Exactly.
There's an old saying, there's an old joke that corporations don't pay taxes, they collect them.
They collect them. That's
Meaning they
exactly right.
they pass those taxes right on to you, and that's why things will go up in price. Yeah, her statement there, I don't know. I think it makes me want to rethink the dumb blonde stereotype. Maybe it needs to be the dumb redhead stereotype. 'Cause
possibly
I'm telling
so.
you what,
Possibly so.
she is one ninny, or at least appears to be.
Yeah. It's amazing that the women of The View and the talking heads of CNN and Guido Cuomo
Right.
and those individuals, they never question any of this stuff.
Yeah.
They never address any of that. They just
Well,
say, "Oh, well, we got to tax the rich."
Well, part of the reason for that, okay, I mean, a large part of the reason for that, I think, is that people who are really wealthy like that, or people who work for government especially, they don't really have to meet they don't have a bottom line constraint. They always have endless supplies of money to spend. No government program or no government worker ever has to think in terms of, gee, we only have this much money to
Right.
spend. Yeah, they have budgets, but they know that, they're the only ones who have budgets. They say, we got to spend this money this year, because if we
Yeah.
don't spend it, we won't get it next year.
Yeah.
Well, that's a hideous recipe. I don't know any business entity that operates that way. They say, gee, we didn't have to spend as much money. That's great. That lets us, and businesses will pass those
Yeah.
savings along to customers. And of course, cynical anti-business folks say, well, no, they just keep it. No, because they have to compete.
They have to compete.
Competition requires these things.
Well, that's right. That's exactly right. That's why the whole charade about greedy corporations is just it's ridiculous.
Right.
Now-
Not that they aren't. Some of them aren't greedy.
Right. Now, no doubt there are
Right.
some of the pharmaceutical company that quadrupled the price
Right.
of EpiPens.
Right.
Yeah, that's just pure greed and
Right, but the question is, what do you want? Do you want lots of corporations that are competing against each other,
Right.
or do you want one giant corporation in the form of a socialist economy with a few people in charge? That's what communist China is. It's basically a giant national corporation.
Yes, it is.
Where all the business activities are directed and controlled by a handful of people. Okay, there is no competition per se, unless you consider national competition, and that is their competition.
Exactly.
And the United States has always, completely outcompeted these socialist economies throughout the world.
Absolutely.
Which is one of the reasons that they are all in a sort of a conspiracy vis-a-vis UN policies and dictates to convert this country into their model, because historically we've always been in control of we've always had large amounts of economic power because of the free market, folks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't discount the fact that we have corporations in bed with government
Absolutely.
who use government to make rules to preclude competition.
That's
They
right.
raise the barriers.
Yeah, that's fascism.
And that's part of this whole best practices, continuous improvement thing.
Right. Public-private partnerships
In businesses, they drive the cost of operating up so high by having these government ends to the marketplace that no one can enter. It's called the cost of entry to market. You can't do it. You just can't get into it.
Barrier to entry is just so high.
Barriers to entry, that's exactly right. So we do have that factor. And, you know, if we look back during the Trump administration, which I have to say, during the Trump administration, I felt good. Because
certainly
regulation was being rolled back.
Right.
You know, there was a drive for competition in this country again, for open markets,
Right.
for the elimination of dependency on foreign powers,
That's
foreign
right.
dictators and communists.
And foreign energy.
Foreign energy. There was a strong sense of self-reliance coming back to the American people.
Right.
But we've got this left communist bloc in this country who say, oh no, we can't have that.
Right.
We can't have people taking care of themselves. We can't have people doing something on their own. We've got to control that.
Well, that's right. Well, that's why they don't like small business. Small
Exactly.
business people tend to be independent-minded, a little less oriented toward, you know, the lemming crowd.
Exactly.
Okay, and so that's a portion of the population that, you know, you got to beat back.
Exactly.
If you're seeking a communist, you know, utopia.
Yeah, and that, when they say we're not taxing anyone making less than 400,000, that's who they're targeting.
That's right.
The small businessman who's making 400 to
Right.
a million a year,
Right. See,
working his rear
Right,
off.
and they don't accurately characterize it. They make it out like, well, this is just some guy who, you know, he's got
Right.
this big giant paycheck. No, most people, most entities making $400,000 a year are S corporations. Okay,
That's exactly
so
right.
the tax consequences propagate to the owner, but the owner typically is really not making $400,000 a year.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And even if he is, more power to him. I say.
Absolutely. Look, wealth creation is a very important thing. All these people that are complaining about these things, they really need to spend some time in some of these other parts of the world. They really, really do. I think they'd have their eyes open and they'd learn very quickly that, you know, in a free society, some people might have Chevys and some people might be driving Rolls Royces.
Oh,
but
that's right.
in these Marxist societies, nobody's driving anything, or they're driving a Volga, which is the old Soviet car that you'd be on a waiting list for like 10 years, and when you got it, it wouldn't even crank. It was a
Right,
piece of junk.
right.
Or does anybody who's old enough to remember the Yugo back when Yugoslavia?
Oh, I remember the Yugo.
Yeah. Sometimes you go, sometimes you don't. Was the joke about it?
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
They,
Yugo was this horrible little vehicle that came out of Yugoslavia, which was a country that was held together by Soviet domination. It was basically Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo and all those Balkan countries. We remember what happened after the Soviet Union fell. There was a giant war over there, and but you know, during the time of when it was called Yugoslavia, they, you know, made some little attempt to build an automobile and export it. It was the worst little thing in the world, and they exported it into this country. To me, it was a perfect, iconic example of the failures of socialist economies.
It was. I had a friend that had one, and the shift lever was actually glued to the transmission.
Oh, wow.
It was actually
Yeah.
glued on. They glued it somehow. That shift lever was glued to the.
I saw a guy in one at a supermarket parking lot, and he was maybe 2 feet away from a lamp pole, and somehow he accelerated the car into the lamp pole, but he couldn't have been going more than 5 or 6 miles an hour, and the whole thing, you know, it was like it was made of balsa wood. The whole thing just exploded practically. It was.
That is hilarious.
Yeah, memories, good times.
Yes, indeed. Well, you know, this whole thing that they're pushing, the communists, the modern communists, and I'm going to call them communists because that's what they are. That's exactly what they are. That's the best
There are a
terminology
number of
we
them.
have for
Well, there are a
them.
number of them that don't shy away from that. When AOC was pressed on that point, she didn't deny it.
Well, that's true.
That was a while back, but I mean, you can look that up.
That's true. Now, they like to call themselves progressive,
Right.
and, you know, what have you. But they're communists ultimately. And what they're doing, what they're pushing in this society is the same thing they pushed throughout history, making the normal into the abnormal.
Well, that's one of their means of revolution.
Absolutely is. And
Yeah.
taking the abnormal and making that the norm. We see that today in many,
Well,
many
I mean,
things.
you know, do we even have to discuss the specific examples? They're so ubiquitous that, I mean, drag queen story hour.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
I think everyone out there can relate to something that's abnormal, that was abnormal in their childhood, but now it's the norm.
Well, that's right.
It's
Well,
perfectly okay.
You know, I love it how the party of science, you know, they can't even figure out which bathroom to use.
Well,
I mean, they
this is
cannot even figure out,
This
you
is
know,
true.
what's a male and a female.
That's right.
These people are absolutely, well, I mean, the people who are sincerely subscribing to this thinking, they're just, you know, mentally,
Yeah.
they're off. They're not right. I mean, they've got other issues, psychological issues.
I believe so.
Okay.
They have some deficiency that they're trying to fill with
That's
this
right.
abnormality.
Right, but the top-down folks who are pushing this stuff, they know exactly what they're doing. They're trying to destroy the language, make it so that that was one of the hallmarks of the French Revolution too.
Yeah.
They changed everything. They changed the calendar. They changed the days of the week.
Yes, they did.
They did all to completely erase any sense of history or of the past. Well, of course, all that stuff is highly destructive and just leads to
It absolutely
anarchy and genocide.
Yeah, it does, and that's what we're seeing that we are so close to today. You know, I happened to see an article by Rob Schofield, who is the director of NC Policy Watch.
Yeah, that's got a nice ring to it.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? Policy Watch, kind of like the Committee of Public Safety.
Right, in other words, another euphemistic description of somebody who's a communist, probably.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he goes on this long diatribe about the complicit. The GOP was complicit in the Trump January 6th scheme. The scheme. He said,
Right.
It's unbelievable how dangerously close we were to an overthrow of democracy. What about 4 years prior to that, when we had a conspiratorial assault on a sitting president for 4 years?
Duly elected president, an ongoing.
An assault that's continuing today.
That's right, and yet has largely been demonstrated to be without any merit whatsoever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's been proven to be completely fabricated. A conspiracy that involves segments of our own government, Congress, the media. Now, that terrifies me.
Yeah, much more so. Right. Well,
the January 6th thing?
Well, first of all, if you've seen any of the video footage, you realize that, and they only released that because they had to. A judge said you got to release the footage, and to any objective observer said, yeah, this is basically a bunch of people wandering around in the rotunda and in the Capitol. Yeah,
exactly.
And it looks like the people who really were breaking in were probably connected with the FBI in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been established. That's not just made up stuff. I mean, I don't really traffic in that, but that's and who died? One person at the hands of a rogue Capitol City police officer who has a history of being irresponsible with his firearms and leaving them in bathrooms and stuff.
Yeah.
He shot some unarmed woman in the neck, Ashley Babbitt.
Through a door.
Yeah, well, such bravery.
Yeah, such bravery. And I want to make a correction on the name. It's Rob Schofield. I'm sorry. Rob Schofield, directly of NC Policy Watch. And with that, we got to take a little commercial break. So we'll be back. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some really terrifying Biden nominations.
Okay.
So stay tuned. You won't want to miss this.
This is Nicholas Bellamy at Premier Equipment. I'm going to talk about the 4540 Mahindra. It's 38 horsepower, full cylinder engine. The weight of this tractor is 4,000 pounds. This tractor is perfect for bush hogging, distance, small garden, a hunting club tractor. Comes with a 7-year warranty, 2-year bumper to bumper, additional 5-year on the powertrain. You can have this tractor for $200 a month, and we have 20 of these tractors in stock. Premier Equipment is open during the week from 8 to 5:30 and on the weekends from 8 to 12.
Are you afraid to answer the phone because of bill collectors? A Chapter 13 plan can help. Chapter 13 allows people with too many bills to work out a debt repayment plan under federal law. It helps you control your debts instead of your debts controlling you. Chapter 13 stops creditors from harassing you and stops repossessions and foreclosures. It allows you to answer the phone again without fear or worry. Call H. Frank Allen, Attorney at Law, a debt relief agency providing bankruptcy relief under the Bankruptcy Code.
You know, I'm not terrified of Trump exploring options on how to handle the election. It was so obviously
manipulated
and
at most benign description you can give it.
Absolutely. I'm not terrified about that. I'm not terrified with a bunch of overzealous protesters prompted by FBI agents,
Yeah.
informants, actors, provocateurs in the crowd. I'm not terrified by that.
No.
What I am terrified by is the fact, as I said, that we have a government that participated in a conspiratorial assault on a sitting president for 4 years. We have the Speaker of the House. We have the members of the Senate, Republicans, Democrats, the media. That terrifies me.
Absolutely.
Now, something that terrifies me even more is that President Biden is now nominating a Soviet-trained communist as comptroller of the currency.
Right. I believe her name is, she's a Cornell law professor. I would probably pronounce his name Saul Amarova.
I believe that's correct.
Okay. And she graduated from the Soviet Union's Moscow State University in 1989, which would have been right before the fall of the Soviet Union. And she's a communist, and she admits she's a communist.
On a Lenin personal scholarship.
Exactly. I mean, one of her quotes, "Say what you will about the old USSR, there was no gender pay gap there. Market doesn't always know the best." Well, actually it does.
Yeah.
Okay, and secondly, the gender pay gap is a myth. That's for another discussion, but that's absolute nonsense. If there were this great gender pay gap, and all these women that could do the jobs of these men, then these greedy capitalist corporations who don't care anything about anything but the bottom line and profiting would be filled with women working these jobs,
Exactly.
and that's not true. Okay, so right there, I mean, just you only have to go one or two little steps in logic to dispel that nonsense.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
But for the more frightening aspect of what she wants to do, okay, her goal is the eventual elimination of private banking and the establishment of the Federal Reserve as the nation's only bank. Which, I don't know if she recognizes the irony in that objective, but the Federal Reserve is the consummate private bank. The Federal Reserve is not an agency of the government.
Exactly.
It is a privately held bank. Do a little research on that. Read The Creature from Jekyll Island. It's a fascinating read, but you'll understand much more about how things work if you understand the nature of our central banking system.
Absolutely. Don't go to Snopes on that one.
Yeah, please.
Because the communists that run Snopes, they'll tell you that, well, it's kind of a public-private
that's
partnership.
Right. That's right.
So don't go to them. Do some real research, and
I don't want to read this whole quote of hers, but basically what they want to do is, eliminate your private local banks or even your bigger national private banks, and you'll have an account with the Federal Reserve, and you'll have a digital currency. There won't be any paper currency. There won't be any cash.
Won't be any folding money.
Yeah,
that's
you're
for sure.
right, and there won't be any financial privacy of any kind. And when they
That's right.
decide, through some kind of social credit system, they don't like what you're doing, you can certainly lose your ability to even function in the economy. I mean, at the most basic level, going to the grocery
Absolutely.
store. I know that sounds hyperbolic and crazy, but we could have said things that sounded equally hyperbolic and crazy a year or two ago, and we would have been born out to be correct.
Well,
Okay.
look what they did during the French Revolution.
Well, that's right.
Had they had the technology, they would have done that.
And boy, I think if you could have landed on something there, I think a lot of what's going on with these folks, I think they really believe that, wow, we finally have the technology by which we can implement this sort of utopian concept. And I think a lot of them are sincere in that. I think they think, with a relatively small group of people engaged in actual productivity, there'll probably still be enough food to feed everybody and provide, a little entertainment through phones and devices. And I think they can do this. We talk about rollerball sometimes, but that was really the essence of that movie from the 70s. That was a sort of a corporate fascist society, and this futuristic yarn about this game that was used to mollify the masses and their impulse for violence. But the structure of the society was this highly technological society where everybody's needs were met, but they had absolutely zero autonomy and zero freedom. And it's fun to go back and watch it. But I think that's what these people think that is at hand right now. I think they believe that they can implement it. They can implement the communist ideal without as much violence and bloodshed. They can do it through technology, and I think that's where they are. I think they think that's where they are. It's not going to work. There's going to be just as much violence and bloodshed as there ever is in these authoritarian revolutions. But that's what's going on.
Yeah, I believe so. And talk about the ultimate in slavery. I mean, that is slavery.
Absolutely it is.
You know, that is slavery. When someone controls you, controls your wealth, controls your income, controls everything you have.
Right.
That is the ultimate slavery.
Well, and reflecting that view, you know, I keep circling back, okay, to Jen Psaki and her stupid statements. But, you know, what was one of the dumbest things else that she said with respect to the $3.5 trillion spending bill? She said, well, it's zero. It costs zero because it's paid for.
Right.
Okay. That actually came out of her dumb mouth, was that the $3.5 trillion is really zero because it's paid for. Well, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Talk about Orwellian doublespeak. What that means is that, well, we're going to inflate, and we're going to use inflation and printing presses and taxes to pay for something, and you know, so it's paid for, so it's zero.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't.
How idiotic is that?
Well, that's just a that is a non sequitur statement.
And I'm going to say something about taxes right now. Not one dime of increase is acceptable to me.
No.
Not one dime.
Right.
I'm sorry, not one dime.
Absolutely.
I pay enough taxes as it is, and if someone wants to throw this phony humanitarian garbage at me about, oh, well, you know, you need to pay your fair share.
Right.
That's the most idiotic thing in the world.
It is.
They take too much tax now. That tax that they're taking belongs to someone.
That's
Someone
correct.
worked for that.
That's correct.
And when one person receives something without effort, without labor,
It means somebody else is working for free.
someone else has labored without reward.
That's correct.
Exactly. So not one dime. It is not acceptable to me. $1 trillion, I don't care if it's 700 million. It's not acceptable to me for them
Right.
to spend anything right now. You know, someone said today, well, you know, we really need to work together because we got to do something.
I
Well,
hate that phrase. No,
Doing
sometimes-
nothing
yeah, is preferable.
is always an option.
That's
That
right.
is always an option. Don't be fooled into this false binomial solution.
Right.
Oh, we can do this or we can do this.
That's right.
Well, no, there's always a third solution.
That's right.
You can do nothing.
You can do nothing and sit tight for a while. Well, that's
Sit
why,
tight.
you know, I mean, as apparently as crumbling as our infrastructure is in some areas, I would much rather we do nothing and live with some potholes an awful while
Absolutely.
until we get this communist crew maybe swept aside.
Absolutely.
I'm not entirely optimistic that's going to happen. But,
No, nor am I.
you know,
And here's a novel idea. Since they have all the resources in the world in Washington, why don't they compile a list of the worst infrastructure? Mm-hmm. A list, prioritize it. How bad it is. Oh, this bridge, well, it could fall in any day now. Well,
Right.
that's pretty bad.
Right.
You know what? Here's a one-page bill. We're going to fund fixing that bridge.
Right, that's right.
And tomorrow, we're going to look at the second item on it.
well, you know, if you know, I mean, I'm hesitant to make, you know, blanket statements about, you know, we should do this and we should do that in terms of the law, but I really think it would almost be worth considering some kind of law or rule that, or even a constitutional amendment that makes it very difficult to have more than one item per bill.
I agree.
You
I
know,
agree.
These omnibus large packages with 100 things in it, you know, they make it very easy for everybody. So I didn't vote for that, but I had to vote
Right.
for it to get the thing that, you know, benefits
Yeah.
my constituents. So
Right.
everybody, so they just they vote for and enact these pieces of legislation that are just horribly onerous, fiscally irresponsible. Again, I think that's all part of sort of the design. Nobody,
It is.
nobody thinks that spending $3.5 trillion, and I challenge most people to even write that number down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
To spend $3.5 trillion, and it's not $3.5 trillion, folks. I mean, they score it in a way where they say, well, this free pre-K child care program we're instituting, it's only going to be for 3 years. Well, you know, it's one
Yes.
thing, there's no government program that isn't permanent.
That's right.
Okay,
That's exactly
so,
right.
you know, conservative estimates are $5 trillion. More accurate estimates are more like $7 trillion. Okay, so $3.5 trillion,
Yeah.
and that's on top of the $1.5 trillion for the infrastructure package that
Yeah.
you know is the one that the Republicans say, well, that one's sort of legitimate. No, it's not. I think there's what, $700 billion of actual bona fide
Yeah.
infrastructure. The rest of it
Yeah.
is more nonsense.
Rest of it's garbage.
You know, more
Absolutely.
right. So you're talking about that plus the $6 trillion we already spent on COVID. You know, if you want to know why inflation is possibly going in this direction, that's one of your answers.
There you go. There you go. You know, you said something there that made me think of something that really is valid. You know, everybody talks about scientific consensus.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, what you were talking about with the bill having so many different things in it, and Congressman A votes for it because there's some that'll help his people, but there's horrible things in it that harm his people. But Congressman B, he votes for it because there's something good in it for his people, but horrible things that hurt his people.
Yeah.
That is the essence of consensus.
Right.
Everybody doesn't agree with everything in it, but they agree that they're going to pass it.
Right.
And that is the scientific consensus of this environmental cult religion. The Green New Deal cult
Right,
religion.
and the climate
And the
change.
same thing with the COVID cult religion.
Which is actually, I think, a trial run, for lack of a better term. I think the whole COVID thing is really a trial run for what they want to do with all this climate nonsense.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. They're pushing the envelope all the time. And believe me, these people that are running this are communists.
They're communists, the communists.
Absolute communists.
Right, and they seek total control. That's all communism is.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
all these isms, you know, communism, fascism, they're all ultimately a manifestation of the two basic personality types. You know, and one of those personality types is the type of there's basically two types of people. I read this recently and I thought it was very apt. Basically two types of people: those who like to manipulate the environment and the universe to create and be productive, and those who like to manipulate people, okay, and control them. All right, and the latter is what's in charge right now, and the latter is really what gravitates towards government in general.
Yeah.
And the founders, they may not have characterized it exactly in those terms, but that, when you distill it all down, that's the essence of the form of government that they gave us, was a constitutional form of government that greatly, severely limits the impact of that latter personality type on our existence. And we have strayed so far from it. Yet, we would be much farther down the road to these destructive policies if that Constitution hadn't been in place all these years.
You got that right, and especially with the Second Amendment in place.
Especially with the Second Amendment, that's
Absolutely.
right. So it's an interesting thing to study. I wish people would be a little bit more engaged in this kind of thing rather than their silly entertainment activities and all that.
As do I, because there are some things you can do to fight back.
There are.
First thing you can do, you can disconnect from all of these distractions.
That's right.
Shut down the social media, shut down the media, quit watching CNN, quit watching all that garbage. Tune out of sports.
And
Hollywood. Get out of Hollywood.
Absolutely.
I won't watch the NBA or the NFL because they have not changed from 6 months or a year ago.
No.
They're still doing the same thing. The NBA is in bed with China. The NFL is still in bed with the radicals trying to destroy this country.
Right.
So I won't watch them. Not gonna watch them.
And ignore the stupid, unenforceable rules that they're trying to put
absolutely.
on you. When you walk into the store, don't just stick that mask on like it's some kind of, obligation. Unless you really believe all this nonsense, but don't just, don't stick that mask on just because, I don't want to get a nasty look from the, who cares?
Okay.
You're selling your liberty down the road, folks.
Exactly, and we're basically out of time, but I want Brittany to put up this graphic right quick. It is the New York Times graphic map, and we know that Florida has done away with the COVID passports and the mandated masks. They banned all of that. They don't make their children wear masks in school. Now look at Florida. I've got it circled with a big red line there. So look at Florida. Florida is no worse than anywhere else. So is that not sufficient evidence that all of these mandates do nothing?
Right. This very much mirrors the data we threw up last week comparing Sweden
Absolutely.
to Israel. Israel being the most vaccinated and the most restrictive in terms of their protocols.
Yep.
Okay. Well, maybe second to Australia. Okay.
Yeah, second to Australia.
Right. And then
we'll talk about that next week.
And then Sweden, who's essentially done nothing, and the results are fundamentally the same.
Absolutely. So, that just goes to show what I've said all along. All of these measures are excessive and unnecessary.
And I'll go so far as to say that even if you can make the case that some of these measures have some benefit, is it worth it?
Right.
Again, it's the 20-mile-an-hour analogy. Are you going to impose a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit on the nation's highways because you think it'll save lives? Well, it probably would save lives when viewed through that narrow lens. But, how many people are going to die because food distribution halts? Ambulances can't get where they need to be. Everything would fall apart.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I've got to question why the excess death rate for this year, on top of what's reported as COVID-related, or COVID deaths, this almost 700,000, there is a million plus in the excess death rate for this past year. Why? Why?
Yeah, well, it's because of lockdown policies.
Exactly. And with that, we are out of time.
Too bad.
And next week, we're going to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah,
We're going to talk about some of these things and some of the materials out there that are based on reality.
Well, and, you know, probably another thing we should explore too. I mean, I had somebody in Walmart tell me, a worker there. I asked, I said, "Are you being told that shortages are imminent?" She said, "Well, not officially, but that's what we're being told." You know, I think, frankly, I hate to be a doomsday, but I think the worst is yet to come on the supply chain.
I agree.
issue.
I think the supply chain is in bad shape
and that's
right
because
now.
of these lockdowns, and that's because of these policies, and they're trying to soften you up for things that you're not going to like.
Yep, exactly. And with that, we're out of time. I'm Robert Cressionnie.
I'm John Gatsis.
We'll see you next week for more America in Danger. Good night. Have a good week.